A helpless golden retriever mother tied to train tracks, her 3 tiny puppies trembling beside her. The distant whistle of an approaching train grows louder, their time running out. Who would do such a cruel thing? And can anyone save them before it's too late? What happens next will lead to an unexpected twist that will leave you amazed. The sun rose gently over the quiet fields of the Midwest, its golden rays casting long shadows across the countryside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and wildflowers. Birds chirped in the trees lining the dusty road, their melodies blending with the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was a peaceful start to what seemed like an ordinary day. But amidst this tranquility, a scene of despair unfolded on the railway tracks that stretched across the rolling plains. A golden retriever lay tied to the cold steel rails, her thin, emaciated body trembling with exhaustion. Her once lustrous coat was now dull and matted, clinging tightly to her ribs. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted around as if searching for salvation. Beside her, 3 tiny puppies huddled together, their fragile bodies shaking from cold and hunger. Their high-pitched cries broke the stillness of the morning, each whimper a plea for help. In the distance, the faint sound of a train's whistle cut through the air. The steel rails began to hum as the vibrations from the approaching locomotive grew stronger. The mother dog let out a mournful whine, her body straining against the ropes that bound her. The puppies, sensing the looming danger, clung to their mother, their tiny paws pressing into the dirt. Time seemed to slow as the train's whistle grew louder, a harbinger of impending disaster. Driving along the quiet road in his silver Toyota Camry, Matthew Carter tapped the steering wheel lightly to the rhythm of a hymn playing on the radio. His mind wandered as he prepared for another day of teaching at the local high school. The car, with its neatly kept interior and a small wooden cross hanging from the rearview mirror, was a reflection of Matthew's steady and disciplined life. At 50, Matthew was the epitome of dedication. He was a beloved teacher, respected by colleagues, and adored by students for his passion and fairness. His lessons went beyond textbooks, often infused with wisdom drawn from his own life experiences and his unwavering faith in God. But despite his outward composure, Matthew carried a quiet burden. 3 years ago, he had lost his wife Emily to cancer. Her absence left a void that nothing seemed to fill, not even the comforting rituals of his faith. His daughter Patricia, only 12 at the time, had been thrust into the turbulent waters of adolescence without her mother's guidance. Now 15, Patricia had grown into a spirited teenager, her fiery independence often clashing with Matthew's structured and principled approach to parenting. Their once close bond had been replaced by tension and misunderstandings, leaving Matthew to wonder if he was doing enough, or perhaps too much. As his car rolled over the gentle curves of the countryside road, Matthew's thoughts turned to Patricia. She had been distant lately, spending most of her time with friends who seemed to share her disdain for authority. He sighed deeply, whispering a quiet prayer. "Lord, give me wisdom to guide her, and patience to love her through these trying times." His prayer was interrupted by an unusual sound. A faint, high-pitched whimper carried on the wind. Matthew frowned, his gaze shifting to the horizon. Slowing the car, he rolled down the window, letting the cool morning air rush in. The sound grew louder, sharper, tugging at his heart. As he rounded a bend in the road, his eyes locked onto a horrifying sight. There, on the railway tracks just ahead, lay the golden retriever and her puppies. The mother dog struggled weakly against the ropes binding her, her movements growing more frantic as the distant whistle of the train echoed louder. The puppies, too small to comprehend their predicament, cried helplessly beside her. Matthew's heart leapt into his throat. Without hesitation, he slammed on the brakes, bringing his car to a screeching halt on the shoulder of the road. Throwing the door open, he sprinted toward the tracks. The train was now visible in the distance, its hulking frame barreling down the rails at terrifying speed. "Hang on," he called out, though the dogs couldn't understand. His feet pounded against the ground as he closed the distance, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The vibrations of the tracks grew stronger with each step, the metallic hum of the rails a cruel reminder of the ticking clock. Dropping to his knees beside the mother dog, Matthew's hands worked frantically at the thick knots that bound her to the rails. The rope was old and coarse, digging into his palms as he struggled to loosen it. The train's whistle blared again, closer now, its deafening roar sending a shiver down his spine. Come on, he muttered through gritted teeth, his fingers trembling. The mother dog whimpered softly, her eyes locking onto his with a mix of fear and hope. Her puppies cried louder, their tiny bodies pressing against her as if begging her to protect them. Matthew glanced over his shoulder. The train was no more than a few 100 feet away, its massive form bearing down on them like an unstoppable force. He whispered under his breath, "Lord, give me strength." With a final desperate tug, the knot gave way. The rope slackened, and Matthew pulled it free, his hands raw and burning. Scooping up the 3 puppies in his arms, he called out to the mother dog, "Come on, girl, let's go." The dog hesitated for a split second, her legs shaky and unsteady. Then, as if sensing the urgency, she rose and followed Matthew as he bolted from the tracks. Just as the train thundered past, Matthew dove onto the grassy embankment, the rush of wind and noise washing over him like a tidal wave. For a moment there was silence. Matthew lay sprawled on the grass, his chest heaving as he clutched the squirming puppies to his chest. The mother dog collapsed beside him, her body trembling but alive. She let out a soft whimper, her nose nudging Matthew's arm as if to say thank you. Matthew exhaled deeply, his head falling back against the ground. Looking up at the sky, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." The train's rumble faded into the distance, leaving only the soft cries of the puppies and the steady rhythm of Matthew's breathing. As he sat up, cradling the tiny lives he had just saved, he knew that this moment, this act of courage and compassion, would mark a turning point in his life and in the life of his family. The journey back home was quiet, save for the occasional whimpers of the puppies nestled in Matthew's lap and the labored breaths of the golden retriever lying on the back seat of his car. Matthew drove cautiously, his mind racing with a mix of relief and concern. He had saved their lives, but their frail condition made it clear that this was just the beginning. As the car pulled into the driveway of his modest home, Matthew turned off the engine and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. His small suburban house, with its neatly trimmed lawn and flower beds, had always been a haven of routine and order. But today it felt different, charged with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. Opening the car door, Matthew carefully carried the puppies into the backyard, where the shade of a sturdy oak tree provided a cool refuge. The mother dog followed weakly, her golden coat catching the afternoon sunlight as she limped behind him. Setting the puppies down on a soft patch of grass, Matthew brought out bowls of water and the leftover chicken from the fridge. "Here you go," he said softly, placing the food and water in front of the mother dog. She hesitated at first, her wary eyes darting toward Matthew before she cautiously lapped at the water. The puppies, too small to eat solids, nuzzled against their mother, seeking comfort. Inside the house, Patricia sat sprawled on the living room couch, earbuds in and her phone in hand. The muffled beat of a pop song played as she scrolled through her social media feed. Her auburn hair was tied up in a messy bun, and her expression carried the aloof indifference typical of teenagers her age. Hearing the front door open, she glanced up briefly as Matthew walked in. His clothes were still dirt-streaked, and his expression looked more focused than usual. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "What happened to you, wrestling in the mud or something?" Matthew hesitated, then decided it was better to involve her than to let her find out later. "I found some dogs," he said simply. Patricia pulled out one earbud, now mildly interested. "Dogs? Like strays?" "Something like that," Matthew replied. "They were in trouble. I brought them home." This piqued Patricia's curiosity. She got up and followed her father to the backyard, where she stopped abruptly at the sight of the golden retriever and her puppies. "Whoa," she murmured, stepping closer. "Where did you find them?" "On the tracks," Matthew said, his voice heavy. "They were tied up. Someone left them there to die." Patricia stiffened, her face betraying a flicker of something unreadable. She crouched down near the puppies, her fingers brushing lightly against their soft fur. Who would do something like that? Matthew didn't answer, but he watched her closely. It was rare to see Patricia show such genuine interest in anything he said or did. For a moment, he thought he saw a glimmer of empathy in her usually guarded expression. Over the next few days, Matthew devoted himself to nursing the dogs back to health. He cleaned the mother dog's wounds, fed her nutritious meals, and ensured the puppies were kept warm and safe. Patricia, though initially distant, began to linger in the backyard more often, watching her father work and occasionally helping with small tasks. She seemed especially drawn to one of the puppies, a tiny, timid creature with a soft whimper and soulful eyes. "Do they have names?" Patricia asked one evening as she stroked the puppy's head. "Not yet," Matthew said, glancing up from where he was bandaging the mother dog's paw. "I figured we'd wait until they're settled before naming them." Patricia nodded, her gaze distant. For a brief moment, the usual tension between them seemed to dissipate, replaced by an unspoken understanding. But the fragile peace didn't last. A few days later, while Matthew was cleaning the backyard, a neighbor stopped by. Mrs. Callahan, a kind but sharp-eyed woman, leaned over the fence with a frown. "Matthew," she called, "you've been busy with those dogs, haven't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Matthew replied, wiping his hands on a towel. "Why do you ask?" "Well," she said hesitantly, "I heard from some of the neighborhood kids about what happened. They said the dogs got tied up on the tracks because they stole food from them. Sounded like some prank gone too far." Matthew's heart sank. "Do you know who they were?" Mrs. Callahan hesitated, then sighed. "I don't like to point fingers, but your Patricia was mentioned. She's been hanging out with Jake and Mia a lot lately. I think Ryan was involved too." Matthew thanked her and returned to the backyard, his mind reeling. Could Patricia really have been part of such a cruel act? It didn't seem possible. And yet, as he thought about her recent behavior and her sudden interest in the dogs, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that Mrs. Callahan might be right. That evening, after dinner, Matthew decided to confront Patricia. She was in her room, scrolling through her phone as usual. "Patricia," he began, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced up, her expression guarded. "What's up?" "I need to ask you something," he said carefully. "Were you and your friends involved in what happened to those dogs?" Patricia froze, her face pale. For a moment she looked as though she might deny it, but then her shoulders slumped. "We didn't mean to hurt them," she muttered. Matthew's heart ached at the admission. "Why, Patricia? Why would you do something like that?" "They stole food from us," Patricia said defensively. "We were just trying to scare them off. We didn't think—" Her voice trailed off, guilt washing over her face. Matthew closed his eyes, struggling to contain his frustration. He took a deep breath and said, "You tied them to a train track, Patricia. That's not a prank. That's cruelty." "I know," Patricia snapped, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't think it would go that far. It wasn't just me. It was Jake's idea, okay?" Matthew knelt in front of her, his voice softer now. "It doesn't matter whose idea it was. You were part of it, and now it's our job to make it right." Patricia looked away, wiping her eyes. "What do you mean?" "You're going to help me take care of those dogs," Matthew said firmly, "and you're going to apologize to them in the only way that matters, by showing them kindness and responsibility." Patricia hesitated, then nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, Matthew saw a glimmer of the compassionate child he knew still existed beneath her tough exterior. Little did they know this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge both of them, reshaping their relationship and their understanding of compassion and forgiveness. The following day, Matthew decided it was time to confront the truth. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together. The neighbor's story, Patricia's confession, and the unspoken guilt in her eyes. But he knew this wasn't just about punishment. It was about understanding. Matthew believed that every action, even one as cruel as this, came from a place that needed healing. By late afternoon, the backyard was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional whimper from the puppies. Matthew sat on the porch, the dogs resting near his feet, as Patricia reluctantly approached with her 3 friends in tow. Jake walked ahead, his usual cocky grin now replaced by an uneasy expression. Mia followed, her shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously. Ryan lagged behind, his face impassive, though the tension in his clenched fists betrayed his discomfort. "Thank you for coming," Matthew said, his tone steady but firm. He gestured for them to sit on the porch steps. "We need to talk about what happened." Jake was the first to speak, his voice defensive. "Look, we didn't mean to hurt them. It was just—" "A prank?" Matthew interrupted, his voice sharper now. "You tied helpless animals to train tracks. Does that sound like a prank to you?" Jake faltered, his gaze dropping to the ground. Beside him, Mia sniffled softly, wiping at her eyes with her sleeve. Ryan, arms crossed, remained silent, but his jaw tightened visibly. Matthew continued, his voice softer but laced with conviction. "I'm not here to humiliate you or to make you feel worse than you already do, but I need to understand why you did it. Start from the beginning." Jake hesitated before speaking, his usual bravado crumbling under Matthew's steady gaze. "We were at the park," he mumbled. "We had some hot dogs and the big one," he motioned toward the mother dog. "She came out of nowhere and grabbed one. She looked hungry," Mia added quietly, her voice trembling. "But we were mad because we didn't have much food left and we thought—" She broke off, her face crumpling with guilt. Ryan finally spoke, his tone cold. "It was Jake's idea to tie them up. I didn't want to, but I didn't stop him either." "Oh, come on," Jake snapped, his voice rising. "You laughed about it. Don't act like you didn't think it was funny." "That's enough." Matthew's voice cut through their argument, silencing the group. He exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. "You all made a mistake. A terrible, dangerous mistake. But the way forward isn't through blaming each other, it's through understanding what you've done and taking responsibility." The words hung in the air for a moment, the teens shifting uncomfortably under Matthew's gaze. Patricia, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice small. "I didn't think it would go that far. We just wanted to scare them." Matthew turned to her, his eyes filled with a mix of disappointment and compassion. "And what if I hadn't been there, Patricia? What if that train had come before anyone could stop it?" Patricia's face flushed, her eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't think—" "That's exactly the problem," Matthew interrupted gently. "You didn't think. None of you did. But now, you have to." He looked at each of them in turn, his voice steady. "I'm not going to punish you, but I am going to teach you. These dogs need care, patience, and kindness. Everything you failed to show them before. You're going to spend time with them, help me care for them, and learn what it means to take responsibility for a life other than your own." The teens looked at each other, uncertainty and guilt etched into their faces. Jake was the first to break the silence. "What do you mean? Like, feed them or something?" "Feed them, clean up after them, walk them," Matthew replied. "You'll be here every day until these dogs are healthy and ready to move on to better lives. That's how you'll make this right." Mia nodded almost immediately, tears still streaming down her face. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Ryan hesitated, his arms still crossed. But after a moment, he gave a curt nod. "Fine." Jake sighed heavily, rolling his eyes. "Whatever. I guess it's better than being grounded." Over the next few days, the transformation was slow but palpable. Jake, initially reluctant and dismissive, began to show a surprising creativity. He crafted simple toys for the puppies out of tennis balls and old ropes, and though he pretended not to care, his face lit up each time one of the pups eagerly pounced on his creations. Mia, the quietest of the group, found solace in tending to the mother dog. She sat with her for hours, brushing her matted fur and speaking softly to her. The once nervous dog began to relax in Mia's presence, her tail wagging faintly each time the girl approached. Ryan, true to his reserved nature, bonded with the smallest and shyest of the puppies. He walked the pup around the yard, his gruff demeanor softening as the tiny creature looked up at him with trusting eyes. Patricia, meanwhile, surprised Matthew the most. She threw herself into the work with an earnestness he hadn't seen in years, whether feeding the dogs, cleaning their bedding, or simply sitting beside them in the quiet of the evening, she seemed to find a sense of purpose in the task. And though she didn't say it outright, Matthew could see the guilt in her every action, a silent apology to both the dogs and to him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the backyard glowed with a warm, golden light, Matthew sat on the porch watching the teens interact with the dogs. Jake was tossing a ball for one of the puppies, laughing as it clumsily chased after it. Mia sat cross-legged beside the mother dog, her hands gently stroking the animal's now glossy fur. Ryan leaned against a tree, the smallest puppy curled up at his feet, its tiny snores barely audible in the stillness, and Patricia, for the first time in years, looked content. Matthew exhaled deeply, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The road to healing was just beginning, but he could see the seeds of change taking root. These children, once careless and thoughtless, were learning what it meant to care, to nurture, and to take responsibility for their actions. As he watched, Matthew clasped the small wooden cross around his neck and whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for guiding them, and for guiding me." Though the journey ahead would still have its challenges, Matthew knew this was the turning point. Not just for the dogs, but for the teens, and for his family. The mornings at Matthew's home now began with the cheerful commotion of barking puppies and bustling teenagers. The backyard, once a quiet space dominated by the shade of an old oak tree, had transformed into a lively haven for the golden retriever and her 3 puppies. Each day, Matthew gathered Patricia, Jake, Mia, and Ryan for their responsibilities, carefully turning what could have been a chore into an opportunity for growth. "Today we're focusing on trust," Matthew announced one morning as the group stood in a semicircle around the dogs. The mother dog, now named Goldie, watched them with cautious but growing confidence. Her puppies tumbled over each other, their boundless energy drawing chuckles from the teens. "What do you mean by trust?" Mia asked, her hand nervously stroking Goldie's head. Matthew crouched down, meeting her gaze. "It means understanding what they need and showing them that they're safe with us. Goldie and her pups have been through a lot. Every gentle touch, every kind word, it helps them heal." Jake smirked, twirling a tennis ball in his hand. "So basically, don't screw it up." "Something like that," Matthew replied, raising an eyebrow but suppressing a smile. Over the days, the group settled into a rhythm. Jake, initially aloof, began channeling his energy into making toys for the puppies. He scavenged old ropes and scraps of fabric from Matthew's shed, fashioning them into makeshift tug toys. One afternoon, he proudly held up a braided rope toy. "Check it out," Jake said, tossing the rope to one of the puppies. The little dog pounced on it immediately, tugging and growling with mock ferocity. Mia clapped her hands, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "That's amazing, Jake." Jake shrugged, feigning nonchalance, but the hint of a grin betrayed his pride. "Yeah, well, I figured they needed something to chew on besides my shoes." Mia, usually shy and hesitant, found her own confidence blossoming as she bonded with Goldie. Every afternoon, she brushed Goldie's coat, untangling the knots and cleaning away the grime of her previous hardships. Goldie's tail wagged each time Mia approached, a silent testament to the trust she had earned. One evening, Mia spoke up during their session, her voice quiet but steady. "I've never really been good at anything," she admitted, running the brush gently over Goldie's back. "But this feels right, like I'm actually helping." "You are," Matthew said, his tone warm. "You're helping more than you know." Ryan, the most reserved of the group, initially kept to himself, his interactions with the dogs brief and cautious. But over time, he gravitated toward the smallest puppy, a timid little one with floppy ears and wide, curious eyes. The two formed a quiet bond, Ryan often taking the pup on walks around the yard, away from the chaos of its siblings. "You've got a knack for the quiet ones," Matthew observed one afternoon as he watched Ryan crouch down to offer the puppy a treat. Ryan shrugged but didn't look away from the puppy. "I guess I get it. Sometimes you just need space." Matthew nodded, sensing the boy's unspoken struggles. "And sometimes you just need someone to understand." Ryan glanced up, his expression softening. "Yeah, Maybe. Amid all this, Matthew and Patricia's relationship began to shift. Their interactions, once marked by tension and misunderstandings, grew easier as they worked side by side. Matthew noticed the small changes first. Patricia staying behind to help clean up after the others left, her laughter ringing out as she played with the puppies, the way she occasionally looked at him with a mix of admiration and gratitude. One evening after the others had gone home, Matthew and Patricia sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Goldie lay at their feet, her eyes half closed as one of the puppies nuzzled against her side. "You're good at this, you know," Patricia said, breaking the comfortable silence. Matthew glanced at her, surprised. "Good at what?" "Helping people, teaching, I guess, just being there when it matters." Matthew's heart swelled at her words, but he kept his tone light. "Well, it's my job, isn't it?" Patricia smiled faintly. "Not everyone would take the time, especially with a bunch of messed-up kids like us." "You're not messed up," Matthew said firmly. "You're learning. We all are." As the days turned into weeks, the group began to function like a team, each member contributing in their own way. Jake's creative toys kept the puppies entertained, Mia's gentle care helped Goldie regain her strength, and Ryan's quiet presence soothed the most timid of the pups. Even Patricia, once distant and defiant, now took pride in her role, often taking the lead in organizing their tasks. Through their shared care for the dogs, they learned lessons far beyond the practical. They discovered patience in the wagging tails that greeted their efforts, forgiveness in Goldie's trusting gaze, and compassion in the small, furry lives that depended on them. And though none of them said it aloud, each of them carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing they were making amends, not just to the dogs, but to themselves and each other. For Matthew, the transformation he witnessed was nothing short of miraculous. The once fractured group of teens was growing into individuals who cared, who tried, who learned. And as he watched Patricia laugh with her friends in the backyard, her walls slowly crumbling, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight bathed the yard in a golden glow, Matthew clasped the cross around his neck and whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for showing them, and me, the power of kindness." Though there was still much to do, Matthew knew they were on the right path. This journey, born out of cruelty and mistake, had become one of redemption, compassion, and connection. A journey that was transforming not just the dogs but everyone involved. The backyard was now a place of joy and healing. The golden retriever, Goldie, had regained her strength, her once dull coat now gleaming in the sunlight. Her 3 puppies, brimming with energy, dashed around the yard, tumbling over each other in playful abandon. The transformation was remarkable, a testament to the care and love they had received over the past few weeks. Matthew stood by the fence, a small smile tugging at his lips as he watched the scene unfold. The teens were scattered across the yard, each immersed in their tasks. Jake was tossing a makeshift toy for one of the puppies, his laughter echoing in the air. Mia was gently brushing Goldie's coat, her voice soft as she hummed a tune. Ryan, ever the quiet one, sat cross-legged in the grass, the smallest puppy curled up in his lap. And Patricia, his daughter, who had once been distant and defiant, was crouched down, playing with one of the pups, her smile bright and genuine. For the first time in years, Matthew felt a sense of peace, but more importantly, he felt hope. That evening, after the teens had gone home, Matthew and Patricia lingered in the backyard. Goldie lay at their feet, her head resting on Matthew's shoe, while the puppies dozed in a pile nearby. The fading sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the quiet yard. "Dad," Patricia said suddenly, breaking the silence. Matthew looked at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. "What is it, sweetheart?" Patricia hesitated, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I've been thinking about Mom, about everything she did for us." Matthew's heart tightened at the mention of his late wife, Emily. It wasn't often that Patricia brought her up, and when she did, it was usually in passing. "She was amazing," Matthew said, his voice tinged with both warmth and sadness. "She had this way of making everyone feel special, like they mattered. She loved deeply, especially you." Patricia nodded, her eyes glistening. "I remember how she used to talk to me when I was scared. She always knew what to say." Matthew smiled faintly, his mind flooding with memories. "She had a gift for that. I think about her every day, you know, especially when I look at you." "Me?" Patricia asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Matthew reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You remind me of her. The way you've cared for these dogs, the way you've stepped up. It's what she would have done. I'm proud of you, Patricia." Patricia's face softened, and for a moment the walls she had built around herself seemed to crumble. "Thanks, Dad," she said quietly. The following days brought more opportunities for connection. Matthew, seeing how Patricia had begun to open up, started sharing stories about Emily, stories he had kept to himself for years. He told Patricia about the time Emily had rescued a stray cat from a storm, how she had nursed it back to health and found it a loving home. He spoke of her compassion, her resilience, and the way she always found beauty in the simplest things. Patricia listened intently, her usual indifference replaced by a genuine curiosity. "I never knew she did all that," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. "There's a lot you didn't know," Matthew replied gently. "I think I was so busy trying to keep everything together after she passed that I forgot to share those parts of her with you. I'm sorry for that." Patricia shook her head. "You don't have to apologize, Dad. You've done so much for me already." Matthew smiled, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "We're a team, you and me, and I think your mom would be proud of how far we've come." Meanwhile, the bond between the teens and the dogs had deepened significantly. Jake, who once approached everything with a smirk and a shrug, now showed remarkable creativity and initiative. He began crafting intricate toys for the puppies, each design more thoughtful than the last. "They deserve something fun," he said one afternoon, his tone surprisingly earnest. Mia, who had always been shy and unsure of herself, now exuded confidence. Her gentle care had transformed Goldie into a vibrant, trusting dog, and the experience had clearly transformed Mia as well. "I feel like I'm finally good at something," she admitted to Matthew one day. Ryan, once reserved and distant, had formed an unbreakable bond with the smallest puppy. He named the pup Scout, and the two were nearly inseparable. "He gets me," Ryan said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. One evening, after another full day of play and care, Matthew and Patricia sat together on the couch, flipping through an old photo album. The images of Emily brought smiles and tears in equal measure, but for the first time the memories felt more like a celebration of her life than a reminder of her loss. "You know," Matthew said, his voice thoughtful, "your mom used to say that love isn't just about what you feel. It's about what you do, how you show up, even when it's hard." Patricia nodded, her gaze lingering on a photo of Emily holding her as a baby. "I think I get that now," she said softly. Matthew looked at her, his heart full. "I think you do too." As the weeks went on, the changes in Patricia were undeniable. She was no longer the distant, rebellious teenager who kept her father at arm's length. She had grown into someone who cared deeply, who took responsibility, and who embraced the lessons of kindness and compassion. Matthew knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But for now, as they sat together surrounded by the warmth of their home and the love of their furry companions, he felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. The gap between them had begun to close, and in its place was something stronger, a bond built on understanding, love, and the legacy of a woman who had inspired them both. The backyard was bustling with excitement. Goldie lay under the oak tree, watching her puppies tumble over each other with wagging tails and playful barks. The teens were scattered around, each of them holding a leash and nervously adjusting collars on the pups. Today was the day Jake, Mia, and Ryan would be taking the puppies to their new homes. Matthew stood at the porch, a smile of pride lighting up his face as he watched the scene. The transformation of the teens was as heartwarming as the recovery of the dogs. From the moment they'd agreed to take responsibility for the animals, they had grown into more thoughtful, compassionate individuals. "All right," Matthew called, clapping his hands. "Everyone ready?" The teens nodded, though their excitement was tinged with bittersweet emotions. Over the weeks, each of them had grown attached to the puppy they had spent the most time with. Saying goodbye to the rest of the litter even while taking one home felt like parting with family. Jake was the first to step forward, crouching down to pick up the largest puppy, a boisterous ball of energy with a wagging tail and sharp eyes. "This guy is coming with me," Jake declared with a grin. "His name's Rocket. Fits, doesn't it?" The puppy barked in agreement, squirming in Jake's arms as if eager to explore his new home. Jake laughed, adjusting the pup in his arms. The once arrogant teenager now looked genuinely excited and proud to take on this new responsibility. "Rocket's going to keep you busy," Matthew said, chuckling. "But I think you're up for the challenge." "Yeah," Jake replied, his voice steady. "I think I am." Next was Mia, who knelt beside a gentle, doe-eyed puppy. This pup had a quieter demeanor, often sticking close to Mia during their playtime. She adjusted the pink collar around its neck, her hands trembling slightly with nervous excitement. "I'm calling her Bella," Mia said softly, stroking the puppy's head. "She's sweet and kind, like she deserves a pretty name." Matthew smiled. "Bella's lucky to have you, Mia. You've got a gift for bringing out the best in others." Mia blushed, but her smile was bright as she lifted Bella into her arms. For someone who had once doubted her abilities, this moment felt like a declaration of confidence and love. Ryan stood apart, cradling the smallest puppy in his arms. The pup, now named Scout, had grown significantly under Ryan's quiet care, but still retained its shy, cautious nature. Ryan had always been gentle with Scout, understanding the little dog's need for patience and reassurance. "I think Scout's going to like it at my place," Ryan said, glancing at Matthew. "We've got a big yard, and it's quiet." Matthew nodded, sensing the deeper connection between Ryan and Scout. "He's going to thrive with you, Ryan, and I think you'll thrive with him too." Ryan's expression softened as he scratched Scout behind the ears. "Yeah, maybe we'll figure things out together." As the teens prepared to leave with their new companions, Matthew felt a pang of pride and sadness. These young people, who had once acted thoughtlessly, had grown into responsible and caring individuals. Their bond with the puppies had been transformative, not just for the dogs, but for themselves. Before they left, Matthew gathered them in the yard. Goldie stood beside him, her golden coat gleaming in the sunlight. "I want to say something before you all go," Matthew began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "What you've done for these dogs, and for yourselves, is remarkable. You've shown that people can change, that mistakes can be mended with kindness and effort. I hope you carry that with you wherever life takes you." The teens nodded, their eyes reflecting the weight of his words. One by one, they thanked him, their gratitude sincere and heartfelt. Then, with their puppies in tow, they headed off to begin this new chapter in their lives. As the yard grew quiet again, Matthew turned to Patricia, who stood silently beside him. "You okay?" he asked gently. Patricia nodded, her gaze fixed on Goldie. "Yeah, it's just weird. The puppies are gone, but it feels right." "It does," Matthew agreed. He crouched down to scratch Goldie behind the ears. "And Goldie's staying right here, with us." Patricia smiled, her face lighting up. "She's part of the family now, huh?" "She always was," Matthew replied. "She's just making it official." The days that followed were quieter, but filled with a new sense of purpose. Goldie, now fully healthy, settled into her role as both a companion and a reminder of the journey they had all taken. Patricia took pride in caring for her, often taking her on walks or curling up with her on the porch in the evenings. For Matthew, this new chapter marked a turning point in his relationship with Patricia. The distance that had once defined their bond had been replaced by shared moments of warmth and understanding. Goldie had become more than a dog. She was a bridge that had brought them closer together. Occasionally, Jake, Mia, and Ryan would stop by with their puppies, sharing stories of their antics and growth. Each visit was filled with laughter and a sense of camaraderie that had once seemed impossible. As Matthew watched the teens interact, their newfound maturity shining through, He felt a deep sense of fulfillment. What had started as a tragedy had become a story of redemption, love, and the power of second chances. Goldie nudged his hand, her tail wagging gently. Matthew smiled, kneeling beside her. "You're a part of all this, you know," he murmured. "You brought us together." Goldie's eyes met his, her gaze steady and filled with trust. And in that moment, Matthew knew that, though life would continue to bring its challenges, they had found something precious, a new beginning rooted in kindness, responsibility, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the small table where Matthew and Patricia sat. Goldie lay at their feet, her golden coat gleaming in the soft light. A peaceful rhythm had settled into their lives, one shaped by the quiet joys of caring for one another and the unspoken gratitude for how far they had come. Patricia poured herself a second cup of coffee, a habit she'd picked up from her father, and glanced at Goldie. "She's really ours now, isn't she?" she said with a smile. Matthew looked up from the newspaper, his eyes twinkling. "She's always been ours. We just needed to figure it out." Goldie let out a soft bark as if agreeing, her tail wagging lazily against the floor. Patricia reached down to scratch behind her ears, a gesture that had become second nature. "I think she knows she's home," Patricia said softly. Matthew nodded, setting the paper aside. "And I think we've found our way home, too." Though the puppies had moved on to their new families, they were never far from Matthew and Patricia's hearts. Jake, Mia, and Ryan had kept their promise to stay in touch, and the bond forged through their shared care for the dogs remained strong. One sunny afternoon, the backyard was once again alive with laughter as the teens visited with their puppies. Rocket darted around the yard, a blur of energy as Jake tossed a ball for him. Bella sat calmly beside Mia, her gentle demeanor unchanged, while Scout trotted after Ryan, still shy but more confident with every step. "They've grown so much," Patricia said, watching the playful chaos unfold. "They have," Matthew agreed. "And so have the kids." Jake walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Rocket's a handful, but I think he's teaching me patience," he said with a grin. Mia laughed, brushing Bella's fur. "Bella's like my shadow now. She follows me everywhere." Ryan, standing nearby, added quietly, "Scout's different, calmer, I guess. He's good for me." Matthew smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You've all done an incredible job. Those pups are lucky to have you." As the day wore on, the teens and their dogs settled into the shade of the oak tree. Stories flowed easily, tales of Rocket's mischievous escapes, Bella's knack for finding the coziest spots, and Scout's newfound bravery. Patricia joined in, recounting Goldie's quirks and the way she'd become part of their family. For the first time in years, the sound of her laughter filled the air, and Matthew couldn't help but marvel at the transformation in his daughter. He thought of Emily, of how proud she would have been to see the woman Patricia was becoming. The ache of her absence was still there, but it was no longer a weight. It was a memory that brought warmth instead of pain. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded, the teens said their goodbyes, promising to return soon. Goldie and Patricia walked them to the gate, their presence a quiet reminder of the journey that had brought them together. After everyone had gone, Matthew and Patricia sat on the porch, the quiet of the evening settling around them. Goldie lay at their feet, her breathing steady and content. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Patricia asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew turned to her, his expression tender. "I know she would. She always believed in the power of love and kindness. And she'd be proud of how you've embraced those things." Patricia smiled, her eyes glistening. "I think I'm starting to understand what she meant, about how love isn't just something you feel, it's something you do." Matthew reached over, placing a hand on hers. "That's the most important lesson she taught me, and now you're teaching it to others." As the stars began to appear in the sky, Matthew and Patricia sat in comfortable silence, their bond stronger than ever. Goldie stirred, her tail thumping softly against the porch, as if to remind them of her presence. "Do you think we'll keep hearing from Jake, Mia, and Ryan?" Patricia asked. Matthew chuckled. If their stories about those pups are any indication, I think we'll be hearing from them for a long time." Patricia laughed, leaning back in her chair. "Good. It feels nice to be part of something bigger." Matthew nodded, his heart full. "That's what life's about, Patricia. It's about the connections we make and the love we share. Those are the things that last." As the night deepened, Matthew clasped the wooden cross around his neck, silently thanking God for the journey they had all taken. What had begun as an act of cruelty had transformed into a story of redemption, kindness, and love, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the bonds that connect us all. Goldie sighed contentedly at their feet, a golden thread woven through their lives, reminding them of the love that had brought them together and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Life often surprises us, weaving unexpected connections and lessons into our days. Through Goldie and her puppies, Matthew, Patricia, Jake, Mia, and Ryan discovered that love is more than just a feeling. It's an action. It's in the care we give, the forgiveness we offer, and the moments we choose to show kindness even when it's difficult. Their journey teaches us that no matter how broken a bond may seem, with love, patience, and compassion, it can be rebuilt stronger than ever. Matthew and Patricia's story reminds us of the beauty of second chances, not only for the dogs they saved, but for their relationships and their hearts. And in every step of their journey, the love and grace of God were present, guiding them to heal, grow, and strengthen the ties that bind us all. Goldie became more than a dog. She became a symbol of hope, a golden thread that brought together a father and daughter, a group of once wayward teens, and a community bound by compassion. God's love works in the same way, connecting us in ways we often don't see, teaching us to find joy in giving and to cherish the bonds we share. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you care about. Let's spread the message of hope, compassion, and the enduring love of God. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when love or kindness changed your life. You never know who might be inspired by your story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the transformative power of love and faith. Together, let's build a world filled with kindness, one act of love at a time. May God bless you and guide you in your own journey of compassion.